Every major wrestling promotion has their biggest supercard of the year, and Extreme Championship Wrestling was no exception. And their big November show doesn't get talked about nearly enough. But why exactly is it so important to remember ECW's pay-per-view in November? Well, while it may not be the gunpowder treason plot, there are still plenty of matches that prove why November to Remember should never be forgotten. And 7 of those reasons are the topic of this episode. Because today, Dave knows 7 great November to Remember matches. While Extreme Championship Wrestling has a reputation for being an extremely violent company, many people don't give ECW the amount of credit that it deserves when it comes to actual wrestling.
ECW! A video on ECW? Man, I love tables and chairs!
You see what I mean?
Precisely. This buffoon going on and on about his tables and his chairs, completely ignoring the real nature of what ECW was really all about. I mean, they had cheese graters and fire too. How could you possibly ignore that?
Anyway, although most people didn't see beyond the violence, fans who aren't familiar owe themselves to seek out the true wrestling nature of what Heyman's house was all about. And a great place to start would be ECW's biggest show of the year, November to Remember. November to Remember hosted some great masterpieces, way too many to mention all of them in just one video. But nevertheless, I compiled a list of just some standout November to Remember matches. Now this is in no particular order, and nor are these necessarily my favorite November to Remember matches. They're just several that I thought were worth mentioning. So without further ado, let's get started. Shane Douglas versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Bam Bam Bigelow might just be one of the best big men of all time. While some only know him for the flames on his head, Bigelow was so much more than that. He was a big man that had no problem taking to the sky or keeping up with the best of them on the mat. He was also earmarked at one time to potentially become one of the biggest babyfaces in the WWF. And while he has put on some great matches with wrestlers like Tazz, Bam Bam's main event ECW World Heavyweight Championship match against the franchise, Shane Douglas, is one of the very best examples of what both men could do. Douglas himself, outside of the ECW community, rarely gets the amount of mainstream attention that he deserves as well. The whole effing show. Rob Van Dam has so many matches in his career that it's hard to pick just one. Like Bigelow, RVD has put on solid gold performances at November to Remember going against Tazz. However, it's one match partnering with Tazz that I think deserves a mention. Rob Van Dam teamed with his frequent partner Sabu and the man they call Tazz to take on the team of Triple Threat, comprising of Mr. No Gimmicks Needed, Chris Candido, who is also one of the very best technical wrestlers of all time and doesn't get nearly enough credit for it, and the previous year's main event that I just mentioned of Shane Douglas and Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, putting aside the greatness of ECW's version of the Horsemen in Triple Threat, I picked this match because of what it represented. Now, Shane Douglas was amidst an amazing run as ECW champion, but RVD was in the middle of a pretty solid run himself with the ECW TV title. And it was in this match that the television champion would hang in the main event of the biggest show of the year. Sure, it may not have been on the line, and yes, the world champion was in the same match, but this is a prime example of how a mid-card title can become elevated to main event status, which a lot of people claim RVD definitely did. Sandman versus Raven. In a serious storyline that saw Sandman involve his real-life wife and son with Raven, fans got to see a great rivalry come to a head in the ECW World Heavyweight Championship match at the 1996 November to Remember pay-per-view. Sandman's wife and child found themselves aligned with Raven, who had stolen their loyalty away from the Sandman. This created a more personal story that utilized Sandman at his best despite his lack of technical prowess. The Sandman came across as a flawed man who, in his own imperfect way, loved his family, and that's all he had. Raven, being the master heel that he was, took it all away because he knew that was how he could really hurt the Sandman. And this storyline was the best way to present both wrestlers for this feud, and this is exactly what great booking is all about. And on an interesting note, Sandman's real-life son would eventually grow up to become a wrestler himself. Fun fact. Psychosis versus Rey Mysterio Jr. This is one of the matches that helped reintroduce Lucha Libre to American audiences and helped to popularize it in the 90s. Following this, and WCW's Cruiserweight division would blow up to new heights after seeing what wrestlers like Rey Mysterio and Psychosis could do. This Mexican death match would forever change how people viewed not just Mexican wrestling, but was the precursor to so much of how wrestling would change in the years to come. With so many people talking about this match, it was only a matter of time before other promoters began eyeing Mexican talent and realizing that Lucha Libre is an untapped resource. This match is also a great watch because of how impressive Rey Mysterio was, especially at such a young age. but also because Psychosis is quite impressive for a man of his size, still doing the Lucha Libre style so well. So while WCW is known for its cruiserweight division, make no bones about it, it all started in ECW, and at November to Remember. Superstar Steve Austin versus Mikey Whipwreck. After being fired from WCW, a young Steve Austin went to ECW fueled by a lot of rage. Now, Steve Austin would only spend a very short amount of time going to the Extreme, but fortunately, during this time, this match at November to Remember against ECW champion Mikey Whipwreck got to happen. Now, originally Paul Heyman wanted Austin to win the title, but he declined, believing that Mikey deserved to hold on to the title a little bit longer. But as a parting gift, it seems that Austin took Mikey Whipwreck's finisher, the Whippersnapper, as a consolation prize. Jerry Lynn versus Lance Storm. There is a list of guys who don't get nearly enough credit for being the technical marvels that they are. And while Lance Storm was highly decorated in WCW and Jerry Lynn's work with RVD is legendary, it's still not enough for either of them. And a specific unsung example of their work has to be their match together at November to Remember on November 1st in 1998. This is a highly underrated match, with many ECW fans not even giving it the credit that it deserves, which I find very surprising. So if you haven't seen it yet, go and watch it as soon as you possibly can. Tanaka versus Mike Awesome. Both men, as far as I'm concerned, are not nearly recognized enough for being great hybrids of being both tough as nails and Mac technicians. And while their whole series was worth watching, their match at 1999's November to Remember might just be one of their best. Coming off of their Anarchy Rules match with Tazz, Awesome was still proving himself as a champion, especially having to follow the widely popular Tazz. And Tanaka was also still proving himself as a main event contender in the ECW scene. And as is the case with so many, when two wrestlers come up at around the same time, they can often fuel each other to perform at their very best. So in this match, you have two wrestlers that were both tough and tech savvy, as well as entering the ring with something to prove. That spells triumph, if you ask me. But there you go, there's my list. What did you think? What are some of your favorite November to Remember matches? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to check me out over on Twitter, as well as supporting me over on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Dave Knows.